Hi and welcome to WikiSim. This is a video about the new features for iterating over values and using the previous value to build up more complex models. This model here is one that I've also got in a spreadsheet. So I just want to show you the spreadsheet model first, and then we can see how it's built in WikiSim. So in the spreadsheet model, we've got this initial population. This is just how population might change over time, given some R value, so this is how it multiplies, and a carrying capacity, which is the limit of what this population can get to. Then we've got two columns here, year and population. Year is just initialized to 1, and then you see for all the subsequent rows, we're just taking the previous row and adding 1 to it. And similarly, population, we're initializing it to the C1 value, which is the initial population. And then subsequent rows have got this calculation. And this is a bit complicated. It's using this R value, the C2, and the carrying capacity, the C3 value, as well as the previous value from the previous row. And you see as you're going down, then it's B7, etc., etc. If you want to add more rows to this, obviously you've got to copy and paste this. This is a bit error prone, it's a bit clunky. And primarily, the point about WikiSim is to make it easier to build these models and to make it easier to build much richer models. So the whole mental model for WikiSim is this first stuff here, the initialization, you do once, and then the subsequent row, these parts here, you also only do it once. And then it should be very easy to just say, do this a lot more times and use all the previous state as input to the next row. So this one here is using B6, but it could be using A6, it could be using C, D, etc. And similarly then this one is using B7, so it's using all of the previous state effectively to calculate its new value. In WikiSim we're doing that so we do it in this way. So the first thing I want to introduce is this kind of modifier here, which says take each one of these values and run the model for each one of these values. So this is exactly the same as what we're doing with the year here. We're just saying for each, well actually it's more the rows in a spreadsheet. It's not particularly the year, we're just saying for all of these rows here, we're going to run this model because we've copied it into all of these rows. So that's what this is doing here. It's just saying run this model multiple times for each of these individual rows. And it happens to be that we're running over the year input, and we're saying the year input goes from 1 to 20, similar to this one, 1 to 20 exclusive. See here, the population we're getting out is just 100 because we're not actually using the previous result. In our model, and I'll just introduce that now, we've got these inputs, so we've got year, we've got state, and we've got config. And see here, we've got some default values. For year, we don't have a default value. And so when you call this the first time, if you don't give it a state value, or if the state value is undefined, then it's going to set up the config, same as this part here. And then it's going to return you the first value. So the first value is going to be year, and then the population is going to be the initial population. So that's exactly the same as this row here. So going back to this one, you can see that when the first time you call it, you initialize it, you could give it any year you want. In this case, we're just giving it year 1. You can see it's returning this thing here. So it's returning us a config, and it's returning us this year 1 and population 100 because we haven't given it any state. So just close scenario 1 and just have a look at scenario 2 now. So this one, we're now iterating over the year. And if we just swap out of that and just go back to this one, you'll see here that the year is just this big long list of values. So here we're not iterating over it. We haven't given it a state, so it's just going to return us the year value, which is just a big long list. We could change this to something like 1, 2, 3, and it's just going to return us that. So it's just returning us the value as it is. Here though, we've got this convenience function of a range, and we're just going to say iterate over that. So now what it's going to do is it's going to say, right, I'm going to run this for each one of these year values. So I'm going to run it 20 times, and these are the results. Obviously, every time we run it, like I said, we're not passing the state value back in, so it just keeps on running and says, well, I don't have a state, so I'm just going to return you this one each time. If I did have a state, however, I'd skip this whole conditional, this block in JavaScript code, and I'm going to run this bit of code instead. So I'm going to get the state population, I'm going to get the state config, I'm going to calculate this new population given the same equation that we've got in the spreadsheet. So here you can see we're getting the population, we're multiplying the population by the R value, and also by 1 minus this population over the capacity. So it's the same calculation here, except unlike in the spreadsheet where we're having to repeat it multiple times, then in the model here, we're just repeating it once. It means it's a lot easier to build more complicated models, and these are also obviously named variables, so it's a lot easier to see this is population plus the R value times the population, etc., etc. Whereas in a spreadsheet, you can make these into named variables, but these ones are, when you're referencing the previous row's value, so down here, B11, B12 is referencing B11, it's not easy to give that a named variable and say, this is the previous population. Whereas in this model, it's trivial to do that. We can see here at the moment the population isn't changing, and like I said, that's because we're not feeding the state back into it. Each time it's being called, state is undefined, so it's just running through that first conditional and just putting the population as the initial value. If we now click this button, magic button, going to use the previous result. So the result that comes out is then going to feed it back into it, and now it's going to start doing the calculation. And if we put the graph on there, you can see this is increasing population just the same as in the spreadsheet. Thanks for listening. I hope that made sense. Please leave any questions or comments below, and I look forward to seeing what you build with WikiSim.